It's always a little bit, you always eye folks suspiciously when they tell you that one of their goals is to be in leadership. Because I've not really ever, I never wanted it. And I've never really met too many people that wanted it. It's just something that you realize. You walk into a realization and a responsibility, and it's there, and you feel a pull or you see a need, and you just step in and start meeting a need, and pretty soon it just develops into a place where you've got influence. And you're influencing others and making a difference. But I'm always a little leery of folks who necessarily come in and say, what are you going to do to be a leader in your church? You know, because I personally like to develop relationships and go from there. So yeah, you see, there's some notes that I'll skip over, but I'll send these with you. But I will point out this, Mark chapter 10, I decided to copy and paste this and share it with you because there's an interesting dialogue between Jesus and the disciples in Mark chapter 10, verse 42. Jesus called them together and said, "You know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you, you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be slave of all, or servant of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." So true greatness and true leadership is found in giving yourself in service to others, not really in convincing others to serve you. But what led up to that dialogue that Jesus is having with the disciples, where he says true leadership is not about you being served, but about you becoming a servant, is the famous story of James and John, the two brothers, the sons of Zebedee. They come to Jesus in verse 35 and they say, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask." How many of you know that's a setup right there? Will you do for us whatever we ask? That's like when my daughter comes up to me and says, "I got a question for you, Dad, but I want you to promise me the answers are going to be yes first." Not going to happen. If you've ever raised kids, you've heard that one. "What do you want me to do for you?" he asked. They replied, "Let one of us sit at your right and the other at your left in your glory." When basically talking about when your kingdom comes. "You don't know what you're asking," Jesus said. "Can you drink the cup I drink or be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with?" "We can," they answered. Jesus said to them, "You will drink the cup I drink and be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with. But to sit at my right or left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they've been prepared." Now when the 10 heard about this, they became indignant with James and John for asking that question, for daring to ask that. But I want to just highlight something. You notice that Jesus didn't rebuke them for their ambition for greatness there. Instead, he questioned their commitment and he hinted at their motive, but he didn't really rebuke the ambition that they had. He just basically said, "It's not up to me to decide who sits at my right and who sits at my left." Well, see, they had enough understanding of Old Testament to know that when the Messiah came, his kingdom was going to be established, and those around him, his apostles, were going to rule over the 12 tribes of Israel. So they knew enough of Old Testament prophecy that if he really is the Messiah, he's going to have a kingdom. He's going to set his kingdom up, and James and John had conversed and decided, let's ask him if we can sit on his right hand and on his left hand in his kingdom. So they were trying to make literal a spiritual application. But I think it's pretty neat that Jesus doesn't really chide them for their ambition as much as he just says, "I'm not sure you know what you're asking. You know, can you handle what I'm about to have to handle and endure what I'm about to have to endure?" So in Scripture, whenever God talks about men who we know to be great men in hindsight, such as Moses, Joshua, David, different ones, he doesn't ever say Moses my leader, or Moses my deliverer, or Joshua my leader, or David my king. He always says Moses my servant, Joshua my servant, David my servant. So he addresses them as servants. So, you know, when it came to that conversation with James and John, he didn't dodge the question that day. He just asked them, can you handle what you're going to have to endure to be my disciples? Do you understand? So basically he was setting forth the cost of serving in his kingdom, so those who wish to lead can do so with their eyes wide open and hearts willing to follow. So let's look at a few definitions of leadership, just definitions from their quotes from authors, from leaders, some famous, some never heard of, some well known. J. Oswald Sanders says, leadership is influence. The ability of one person to influence another to follow his or her lead. So that's one definition. The great military commander Bernard Montgomery said, leadership is the capacity and will to rally men and women to a common purpose and the character which inspires confidence. I don't know how you pronounce this guy's name, Li Hongqiang. He was a leader in China who, when asked for a definition of leadership, had this to say: there are three kinds of people in the world. Those who are immovable, those who are immovable, and then those who move them. Leaders move people. Then President Harry Truman said, a leader is a person who has the ability to motivate people to do what they don't want to do and make them like it. So some people are born with natural leadership qualities, such as charisma, strength, determination, confidence. Some people are just born with exceptional confidence or exceptional abilities. I said this morning, I wasn't someone who was really born with exceptional confidence. That was something that I had to develop. Trust had to develop. I had to learn to trust the Holy Spirit, to the point where, I didn't even want to talk in front of a small group of people. And then, then later I would end up preaching in front of thousands, 2,000. I've been on the stage in front of 10,000 even in Russia before. But I didn't even have confidence for a Bible study in a living room. The confidence had to develop. I had to just step out and start obeying the Holy Spirit. But some people are born with natural giftings, natural confidence, natural charisma, and then in others of us it's developed. Okay, but there's really, it doesn't make one better than the other. I'll talk about that in just a second. Because there are natural leaders and spiritual leaders, and some spiritual leaders have natural leadership qualities and characteristics. But spiritual leadership, it can be a combination of both spiritual and natural qualities working together. However, spiritual leadership transcends the power of personality. It goes beyond natural gifts because spiritual leaders are saturated with the power of the Holy Spirit. And so that's a big difference, is having the power of the Holy Spirit. The more yielded we are to Him, the more influence we have on others, and we become a vessel that He uses. Just like Gideon was a man who never saw himself as a national deliverer until the Lord put him on and wore him like a coat and took him into battle. But there was a process of development. So we can only lead others as far along the road as we have traveled. And that's where our personal journeys come into play. Our personal journeys in life and the things that we've been through, the things we face, the things that we've handled, whether we thought we handled them well or not, we go through these things. We begin to accumulate wisdom from them. In some cases, we learn from things we tried that worked. Some cases, we learn from things we tried that didn't work. And we kept trying until we found something that did work. But eventually, all of that stuff just becomes accumulated wisdom in our lives, accumulated knowledge. And we learn to navigate the setbacks and the detours of our life. So the Lord takes all of this. When it comes to having influence with people, not influence to lord it over them, but influence to serve them and to lead them in a particular way. The Lord begins to work all of these things together to make them work together for good. And so all of the stuff that we saw, setbacks and detours, and now that all the roadblocks are out of the way, I can finally get where I'm going. But no, it was all of that stuff that got you to where you are. All of those things come together, and they're all part of the process. I'm not saying they all come from God, but they're all part of it. He uses it all for sure. So at a large convention in China, a group of men debated over the qualities and characteristics of leadership, and it became a well-heated, the book that I was reading this from, well-heated discussion. They finally turned to the well-respected D.E. Host, who was the director of China Inland Missions at the time. They asked him for his input because he had been quiet the whole evening and stayed out of the conversation. With a smile, he replied, "It occurs to me that perhaps the best test of whether one is qualified to lead is to find out whether anyone is following." So, that's a pretty good test. So are leaders born or are they made? And it seems like some are born with natural giftings, but the answer is both. They're born and made. On one hand, leadership is an elusive electric quality that seems to come directly from God, but on the other hand, leadership skills are distributed widely among every community known to man, business, all of businesses. They bring people together. Dr. Sam Chan is a guy who I've listened to a few times, and Bishop has had him up to the Gates Church. And but he also is a consultant, and Dan Rockwell as well is another guy who he has in on a regular basis. These guys don't just go to churches. They go to businesses, churches, large businesses, small businesses. There are corporations now that pay these guys big money to come in and teach mentoring skills, coaching skills, and mentorship skills and leadership skills. So whether they're Christian or not, like Dr. Chan, I know, was raised in a pastor's family in India, and he is a preacher, but where he really gets paid the big money is from corporations. They set events up and they bring all their employees. They'll hire him for a week, bring him in, and for a week he'll mentor employees and teach life skills and leadership skills and develop them. Dan Rockwell, if you're on Twitter, his Twitter handle is @LeadershipFreak, but he's one of the most followed leadership development teachers in the world on Twitter and social media. Dan Rockwell is. Same thing with him. So these guys are being brought in by companies who recognize we don't necessarily need you to come in and preach to our people, but we need them to be developed. So can you become a leader? And I believe that we all can. I believe we can all have influence developed in us. And I think that Jesus was revolutionary in his day, especially when he came on the scene, because when he selected leaders, he ignored all the popular ideas of his day and our days, as a matter of fact, about what kind of person could fit the role. When you look at the 12 men he started off with, his disciples started out untrained, without influence in the beginning, but later they would go on and change their world. So on the surface, these men came from different walks of life, tax collector, lawyer, doctor, fisherman. They had different walks of life. All of them were really kind of unimpressive and had no outward distinctives that really screamed, hey, I'm leadership material. But he saw something in each one of them that he knew could be developed under his hand. And I think that's really what it comes down to, is that all of us have raw talents and gifts and things on the inside of us that have to be developed. And so each of them had the qualities that had to be identified and then developed. Natural leadership qualities are important, and oftentimes in many churches, natural leadership qualities lie dormant and undiscovered in a lot of people because they've never been tapped into, they've never been identified, or they've never been developed. And I'm going to go through the last part really quick. This is homework for you, the last page and a half. What I want to do now, because I got to the word developed, is I want to set this video up. It's about a 16-minute video or so from Stephen Furtick, but he talks about development. He said one of the things, he did a survey in his church one year, and he said one of the things he constantly heard from people in his church, and he's got a large church, it's really grown to where they're very influential now. And but he said one of the common things he heard from all of the leaders is, I want to be developed. I want to be developed. Further develop me. So this thought that he's going to share is on development. So it's pretty interesting, and he's a funny guy too. If the video greens out, you can still hear the audio. I don't know why it's doing that.
And the angle that I wanted to give on leadership development today, because that's really what I want to talk to you about, is best represented not in an office or a studio or an auditorium or some fixed controlled environment. I decided to bring it in the weight room. So, this is our jungle. We call it the jungle here at Elevation Church. It's just a little simple workout facility that we have for our staff. They use it more before summer than they do during October, for instance. But, we made this available to our staff. Now, as the staff has grown, we've asked ourselves, how can we develop our leaders, not just spiritually, but physically and emotionally, and all these questions that you ask. So this is one of the ways we do it. But something happened to me, and I promise you I'm going to read a Bible verse and share some points you can write down. But let me just tell you a story about my journey as a leader. I'm 37. Many of my staff are in their 20s. And last year, I was looking through some staff evaluations. year-end staff evaluations. And I began to notice from our staff, not just in one area, but all throughout the church, this demand for more development. And it was people saying things like, I wish my supervisor would develop me more. Of course, as the senior pastor of the church, I feel responsible for their development. I feel like maybe accused if they're saying, I don't feel like I'm growing enough. And it got me thinking. It made me start to wonder, have I really even explained to the people I lead what development looks like? Because when we talk about leading like Christ, which of course all of us want to do, we always talk about compassion. We talk about service. Jesus washed the disciples' feet. But once I was reading the scriptures and I realized that one of the adjectives that would have probably been most used of Jesus by those who actually followed him, not those who read about him 2,000 years later and wrote books about what they didn't experience personally, I bet if you would have asked Peter, James, John, or even old Bartholomew, who we don't hear much about, if you would have said, what kind of leader was he? Yeah, they would have said he was kind, and yeah, they would have said he was loving, no doubt. But I wonder what they have said before they said any of those. He's demanding. He's demanding. And see, even when I say that, when I tell you that the focus of my session with you today is to try to encourage you to be a more demanding leader, it sounds so negative, so contrary to what we strive to be as leaders. So I was reading through my staff evaluations and realizing that they were asking me for more development. But the way this works is the only way that you get developed is on demand. So that's my title today, is Development on Demand. And I'm not talking about Netflix, okay? We live in a world today where everybody gets everything on demand. So they don't have to come to our church to watch it live anymore. They can get it on demand. They don't have to watch Walking Dead on Sunday nights at 9 or 10. They can watch it on demand. I don't have to sit through your commercials. I got it on demand. And then that expectation carries over into our life as leaders. So we come to God and people come to our church staff and they have this idea or concept of development. Oh, I want to be developed. Oh, I want to grow. Oh, I want to be used by God. But then we have our own terms of how that's supposed to look. When I look at the life of Jesus, he didn't ask the disciples how they wanted to be developed. And I'm going to use one example. I could use a lot. I could talk about him telling a man with a withered hand to stretch it out, which is very not PC, by the way, to challenge someone's physical disability. I could talk about the time when he didn't tell the disciples that any food would be necessary for an after party, preached on, and then told them to feed people with the little boy's lunch. I mean, if you look at pretty much everything that Jesus did in the scripture, it was on demand, but not in the way we want to say on demand. Not they got to choose how God developed them, but Jesus was constantly finding out what was in somebody by putting something on them. And that's the principle, isn't it? For you as a leader, for me as a leader, for those that we lead in our ministries. The only way for me to find out what's in you is by what I put on you. It's development on demand. That's the only way that the anointing can be released. That's the only way growth can occur. That's the only way new levels can be reached. So Peter's been fishing all night in Luke chapter 5. I got it right here on my iPhone 7. I just upgraded to a 7, so I know this is going to be anointed because 6 is not God's number and 7 is. Amen, somebody. And I just pulled this passage up how when he saw Peter standing there and they were washing their nets, probably in a state of frustration, if not frustration, at least being annoyed that they were having to get ready for the next fishing trip after catching nothing on the last one, because that's when God will do some of the greatest work in your life, by the way, after you've come up empty, after you've gone down to the bottom of what you think you can do and what you think you can be and what you think you have in you. That's where Jesus steps in and says, hey, Peter, let me use your boat. Let me access your equipment. And Peter lets him do it. And you know the story, man. I'm not going to try to give you a basic Bible story. I just want to give you a principle. When he told Peter, put out in the deep and let down your nets for a catch. And Peter, who's called Simon at this point, answered, Master, we toiled all night, or we worked all night, and have caught nothing, but at your word, watch this, on demand, I will let down the nets. And when they had done this, they enclosed a large number of fish, and their nets were breaking. And they signaled to their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And you know the story, that the boat started to sink. And Peter saw it, and he fell down, and he said, Lord, depart from me. I'm a sinful man. And then Jesus said to Simon, don't be afraid. From now on, you will be catching men. Here's what I want to point out. I want to point out what Jesus didn't say to Peter. He didn't say, hey, would it be a good time for me to utilize your watercraft? I mean, do you feel like it? Or here's what he didn't say. He didn't say, hey, one day I want you to preach on the day of Pentecost. I want you to be used to usher in the age of the Holy Spirit. So can I sit down and give you a hermeneutical lesson and maybe work with you on developing and crafting more memorable illustrations, or how to connect with people at an emotional level? I'm offering a 13-week seminar. None of that. What does he do? He puts a weight on it, gets in his boat. He physically puts weight on what Peter had been using as his profession. And without making a connection between why he was doing it and what he was doing, he gives Peter an instruction. A simple instruction, a seemingly stupid instruction. And Peter didn't find out what was in the water until Jesus put weight on him. The weight of an instruction that he didn't understand. And I point this out because sometimes the times in our lives where we feel the most frustrated and we're coming out of seasons of failure are actually the times in our lives where God is producing the most. You know this. You've experienced this. Now let me shift it. If that's true of you as a leader, is it not also true of those that you lead? I'm not saying that we should call people at 3 a.m. and get them up out of the bed and pretend like they don't have families. That's not what I mean. I'm not saying that we shouldn't look after the well-being of our people and try to be encouraging. But what I see Peter having to respond to here from Jesus is development on demand. And I teach our staff something. I teach them that the greatest compliment I can pay you is to demand more from you, because it means that I see something in you that you might not see in yourself. And how will we ever find out what's in you if we don't put anything on you? Like a couple of years ago, I wanted to start getting stronger, physically. So I got my buddy Buck. Buck, come over here. Buck is on my staff. He actually oversees, am I going here now? He actually oversees the fitness for our staff. He oversees this area and fusses at the staff when they don't put the weights back and all of that. But Buck has traveled the world with me. We've been in all kinds of situations together, and I've known him since college, and I've noticed that as I lead him, with each time that I've put more on him, it released more in him. Some might call it supply and demand in terms of economics. And see, the thing about Buck is he wants to experience the fullness of his calling. Let me tell you something about those that you lead. They want to know what's in them that they haven't yet accessed. They want to know to what levels they can think and to what levels they can grow, but they will never know that in a classroom. It has to be in the context of calling and real life. So it looks like this. I wanted to demonstrate. If I told Buck to do some squats with this 45-pound bar, he could do it. I mean, I know he could do it. I've seen him do it. He's a beast. And he could do it as many times as he needed to do it. But if you rack it real quick, Buck, the only way right there for me to really find out what's in him, because the assumption might be at this point that that's all he can handle. And I'm telling you, you've got people around you right now as a leader who have capabilities that you haven't even accessed yet. And you are telling yourself lies based on limitations that don't exist. But when you put more on them, you'll discover that there's more in them. Now, that's not any kind of weight for Buck. Buck is a beast. Buck is an MMA fighter. He was a national champion wrestler or something like that. I might be exaggerating a little bit. But that's not all he has in him. I mean, it looks pretty good. I'm sure he could get tired if he did it enough. He has perfect form. But stop, Buck. The only way for me to really find out what's in him, and he's getting kind of nervous, but I mean, this is what he came for. When I came to Buck a few years ago and asked him to start training me physically, I had in mind something that I wanted. I wanted him to develop my physique to the fullest extent of its capacity. Now, imagine how ridiculous it would be if I came in and asked him for that, and then the moment he starts handing me weights to lift, I say, oh, you lift them for me? Yet as leaders, we somehow think that people are going to grow by what we teach. They're not going to grow by what they teach. Jesus didn't give a lesson on full nets. He gave Peter an instruction on what to do with an empty one. Are you as a leader placing enough weight on the people around you? Because I think he can do 225. How about you affecting destiny? I think he can do it. How about you, Bishop Tony? I think he can do 225. I think he can do it effortlessly. I don't even think that's a problem. But see, if we would have started with the bar and stopped with the bar, the conclusion would have been that Buck can squat 45 pounds, and we know that's not true. But the only way for us to know is to put more on him. You can rack that, Buck, because I know you're trying to look like you're not breathing hard. The fact is, my very willingness to put weight on this bar, oh yeah, he was hoping I would go for the 25. This is affecting destiny, Buck. This is not a normal conference. So we got to do it all the way. Because the only way for us to really prove his strength, the only way I can really back up what I said about him, because see, Jesus saw something in Peter. He saw a rock in Peter. He didn't see something shaky. And you're surrounded with people right now, and you need to change their name. You need to change their frame. You need to change their perspective. This is leadership. Leadership is to say, you know what? I'm going to trust you to try it again, even though you just messed it up. We're going to do this even though it seems impossible. Even though you fished all night, stop washing your nets for a moment. I want to put some weight on you. Get them down to the bottom. And then the weighted nets, the weight of Jesus in the boat. You see a theme here? The more weight he puts on them, the more frustration they feel, the less they understand it is in that place that their potential surfaces. So how many think he can do 315? If you think he can do it, let's get a little participation. I know we're not together physically, but come on, we're connected in the spirit. It sounds like a good Pentecostal thing to say for Bishop Tony. All right, ready? If you believe he can, say, Buck, 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 Buck. Come on, Buck, Buck, Buck. You better be participating. Buck, that's 315 pounds of pure Buck potential. Buck, Buck, Buck. Look at that. Buck, I think he can do another one. Come on, Buck, Buck, Buck. I think he can do one more. Buck, Buck. And he can do 12 of those, but we're going to stop right there because I only have. Let's give it up for Buck. Come on, let him hear you. All the way in Charlotte, North Carolina. The only way that he found out that was in him was because it was put on him. And you know, it wasn't put on him all at once. He's done this before. I mean, it'd be stupid to put him on this the first time he ever came in the gym. It'd be stupid for me to put me under this. You notice I didn't do this illustration. I had somebody else do it because a good leader knows when to delegate. What I'm trying to say is, you got bucks around you. You got people around you that God has put in your ministry, and you keep trying to teach them and train them, and that's good. But the only way to transform them so that they can find out what is in them is to put something on them. And how about you? Are you expecting God to develop you, but you don't want to do what he's demanding of you? You can't expect development and despise demand. You can't expect development and just want to study nets. This conference is awesome. This is not development. This is not development to come into the weight room and to stare at the weights and to marvel at their function. That's not development. Nothing happens until I get under this weight. Nothing happens until I throw my nets to the bottom. Nothing happens until I have the hard conversation. Nothing happens until I commit myself to the deep waters. And so God is trying to get you to see today. It's not a lack of supply. It's not a lack of ability. It's not a lack of strength. It's a lack of demand. Many of us think we've got too much on us. That's not the problem at all. The reason we don't have the strength, the joy, the peace, the direction released in our lives is because we don't have enough demand. You know, we're living at a level that we can handle. And I believe God is calling somebody out into deep waters today. And often, please write this down, your classroom will not look like your calling. Jesus didn't tell Peter, I want you to practice preaching. He told him he wanted him to fish, but what he learned fishing in the classroom of the deep waters is what he would need for his calling. And that is that when God puts a demand on your life, he also releases the supply. So I just want to ask a simple question for our time today. these principles. Who is around you right now that is asking to be developed? The only way it's going to happen is on demand. What are the parts of your ministry and your life that you've been trying to tell God, if you'll do it like this, or if you'll send me that person, or if you give me this resource, or if I were in that town? Where are you trying to treat God like Netflix? That would make a good title for the message too, wouldn't it? Netflix, because, you know, when Jesus told Peter to let down the nets, I don't know, somebody could work that out. Netflix, empty nets. I don't know, Bishop Tony Miller will make a message out of it. But I want you to learn how to love the feeling of empty nets, knowing that they lead to full boats. The only reason that Peter was able to signal partners is because he followed an instruction. See, the other boats came when Peter did what he could with what he had. That's where you are today. You might have nothing but a net that you're mending on the shore and an empty boat, some frustrations about people who left you, but you can't stay there. Who you need for the next season will be released when you follow the next instruction. So I'm praying for you today, and I also want you to pray for Buck, because next time that I make a video for Affecting Destiny, he's going to be squatting 405, all right? And he's going to find out what's in him by what we put on him.
Stephen Furtick's awesome. He's right. Stephen Furtick. F-U-R-T, is it Y?
T-I-C-K.
T-I-C-K. Stephen Furtick. Yeah, his church has really just blown up out in North Carolina. He's an awesome guy. This is something that, man, has been resonating in me since the conference, especially. At the conference, there was a lot of stuff like this that was put out. I shared this morning that, you know, Craig Rochelle got into great detail, was very, very transparent and honest about the early days of his ministry and calling, and how he lacked the resources to do. And I mean, for us right now, we're like seeing the success story of Life Church. But he shared the nitty-gritty of how it started, how it launched in a garage with 10 or 12 people, and how they transitioned into multiple buildings, all of the steps along the way. But he said what always transitioned them from one phase into a next phase of acceleration was when they would come up against a brick wall and they had no resources, limited means, nobody to really help get them from this level to that level. And when they hit the wall, then they had to dig deep and become innovative and creative with what they had and who they had. And he said that was every time. It was never an outside fix. It was never God sending someone in to write a huge check. You know, it was never somebody coming on saying, I have all the answers for you. It was always something from inside that the young man who, when the website failed, the YouVersion website failed miserably, he said, and wasn't accomplishing anything they wanted it to. And there were all kinds of bugs with the system. Then they found this young man in the church, you know, it's just a teenage boy, 19 years old, who said, I think I can make an app for you. Have you considered making a YouVersion app? And they got together and he created the app, which I don't know how many billions of copies now have been downloaded around the world, but it's huge. And so this stuff has been resonating in me, and what Michael and I are working on right now is really just the structure of the church, because we got to get the church healthy and put some structure in place and some systems in place. But along the way, what that's also going to evolve is exactly what Stephen was talking about, is once the structure's in place, we're going to start putting more weight on the people that we have around us, and putting that weight on them so that we can see what they have in them, and just seeing people rise to the occasion. Because I believe that we have what we need right inside of our house right now. I love it when the Lord brings people in, but I also believe in the destiny that you have in you. So what I want to do just real quick, I want to read through these quickly and ask you to put a negative, a minus sign or a plus sign beside each one. This is kind of a real quick eval or an examination. Here's some principles for consideration, okay? So I said that natural leadership qualities are important and they lie dormant and undiscovered in people. I just want you to kind of quickly grade yourself, but in this next month, I want you to go back and read over each one of these. grade yourself, evaluate yourself. We'll just take this last 15 minutes and go through these real quick and see what needs to be done to improve them, okay? So put a minus or a plus sign beside this. This is just private. You're not turning this in. I'm not looking at it. This is just for you, okay? So how do you identify and deal with bad habits in your life? How do you identify and deal with bad habits in your life? Because to lead others, you must learn to master your appetites. Not just talking about food when I say appetites, but just the bad habits in your life, okay? And I'll be transparent with you as well, okay, about some of these as we go through them. How well do you maintain self-control when things go wrong? How well do you maintain self-control when things go wrong? Because the leader who loses control under adversity forfeits respect and influence. A leader must remain calm in crisis and resilient in the face of disappointment. Next one, to what degree do you think independently? A leader does learn to use the best ideas of others around him in decision making, but cannot be afraid to move forward and make up his or her mind when the situation calls for it. So to what degree do you think independently? Number 4, I said I was going to be transparent, so I will. This one has been a tough one for me, and I'll tell you why in just a little bit later down the list. But how well do you handle criticism? How well do you handle criticism? When have you profited from it? So the humble person can learn not only from petty criticism, but malicious as well. So petty criticism to me is when people say I'm too long-winded. Malicious criticism is when people around town stand behind their pulpits and tell people I'm a cult leader and I'm preaching heresy. That has happened as well. So, you know, but what I have to learn how to handle criticism better. I'll tell you in just a minute why that's been a problem for me. Can you turn disappointment into creative new opportunities? We talked about that extensively this morning. Can you turn disappointment into creative new opportunities? So ask yourself, here's a test. Ask yourself in that moment, what 3 actions could I take right now that will create a new opportunity? And then whatever comes to you, jot them down. Do you readily gain the cooperation of others and win their respect and confidence? Genuine leadership will not have to manipulate and pressure others, but will learn to inspire instead. It's better to lead by inspiration. Do you readily gain the cooperation of others and win their respect and confidence? Now, this is not a test to see whether you're a leader or not. This is because, like I said a while ago, leadership skills are in every one of us and can be developed. This is an evaluation just to help you see where areas need to be developed in your life, okay? Can you exert discipline without it being a power play on another? In other words, what that's talking about is are your corrections clear and constructive rather than destructive? Because true leadership can correct someone without it feeling like a show of force. In other words, it can be done in love. It can be done in love. It can be done firm and still in love. The next one, can you be a peacemaker? Can you be a peacemaker? What situations have I been a peacemaker in the past? If you can think of one, jot it down to yourself. A leader must learn to reconcile with and make peace where arguments have created hostility. Now, I was transparent with you about regarding a weakness, so I'll be transparent here as well. This is a strong suit for me because I am a peacemaker by nature, and I don't like to have confrontation and without arriving at a conclusion. So I like to continue to talk until something Stacy and I had to learn about each other when we got married is that she's not like me. Especially when we got married, she's grown a lot. We've both aged, we've developed, we've matured. When we first got married, she was young. She was 20. I was 26, going on 27. So we would have a heated argument, and she would go to the other end of the house and slam the door and want to be left alone. Well, that wouldn't work for me because my nature wanted to talk until it was resolved. Hers didn't want to talk for another 2 days. You know, she wanted me to leave her alone and not say another word about it. Well, that just drove me insane. I would stand at the door knocking. You're going to talk to me. And so finally, you know, then she would leave and go to her mom's house. Her mom would say, get your tail end back home to your husband, you know. And so it was a mess. But I had to learn her nature. She had to learn mine. I had to learn when she's heated, don't even try to talk to her. Just give her some time to calm down, and then we can have a discussion. She had to learn not to take 2 days, but just a few hours. Because she knew me by nature, I'm not going to want to carry something around for a couple of days. I'm going to want to get it resolved and say, I love you by the time we go to sleep that night. So, or the next day at the latest, because I am definitely a peacemaker. And that has carried over into the pastoral gifting as well. Next one, do people trust you with difficult and delicate matters? Remember, you're just evaluating and looking internally right now, seeing what areas you need improvement. Next one, do you know how to value others? That's very important, looking at people, dealing with people, valuing others, finding the value in others. Next one, can you accept opposition to your viewpoint or decision without taking offense? That's a tough one, because leaders are always going to face opposition. I mean, pretty consistently, not always going to have everyone agree with you all the time. So you have to be able to accept opposition to your viewpoint or decision without taking offense. Now, Michael talked about this week before last in midweek Bible class, the difference between academic Christians and pop culture, academic Christianity and pop culture Christianity. In pop culture Christianity, if you say something different than what they agree with, then the hair stands up on the back of their neck and they can't believe you don't agree with them. You're wrong, they're right. In academic Christianity, they don't mind disagreements. They have debates, they schedule debates. They schedule discussions they gather together on purpose with people they don't agree with, so that something productive and fruitful can come out of it by the end. So they like to have those types of talks. Can you make and keep friends? Can you make and keep friends? Your circle of loyal friends is an index of your leadership potential. Your circle of loyal friends is an index of your leadership potential. So can you make and keep friends? I'll go through them kind of quick, okay? Do you depend on the praise of others to keep you going? Can you hold steady in the face of disapproval and even temporary loss of confidence? This is another one that I'll be transparent on. The reason why I struggled with the earlier one that I said is because, and this is something that Nate and I talked out in a couple of sessions together, is that it's not that where was that? It's not that I count on people's praise, but what Nate helped me understand was that one of my love languages is words of affirmation. So if you've ever read The 5 Love Languages from Gary Chapman, that's a great book. If you haven't read it, check it out. You need to take a good look at it, because it helps you learn how to communicate with your significant others and with everyone you're in a relationship with, really. But there is, we all have a different love language. Some it's acts of service, and some it's touch, physical touch. Some it's words of affirmation. Those are what refill your tank, your emotional tank, and keep you running up on F instead of down on E. Well, one of my primary ones is words of affirmation. And so that is one thing I've had to be careful with through the years, is that it does fill my tank up when people shower praise on or affirm a message that I preached on a Sunday. But I've had to be careful not to feed on that in from a wrong perspective. And so Nate, I've had some sessions with Nate. So because of that, and now my wife knows it's one of my primary love languages, but because of that, she knows that nobody can build me up faster than her with the words that she speaks. But she also has found out nobody can tear me down faster with the words that she speaks than her, because she's the one I'm in covenant with. And so her and I have just had to learn to navigate those waters together. But you depend on the praise of others. I had to really learn it's not the praise of others. It's just words of affirmation are things that I've learned to take what a healthy dose of what it is that's needed to keep me going, because you will find yourself at different situations and times in your life where there's a disapproval. As a matter of fact, right now, I find myself praying for my president quite a bit right now because of the attacks, the voracious attacks against him right now. And he's finding himself facing a disapproval right now, which is I'm not going to get into the politics of it, but what he's going to have to do is dig deep right now, soul search, and continue to remain steady with his task and his mission in the face of disapproval. And you see what I'm saying, and not take that so personal. Now, I love the guy, but one of his bad habits is to lash out on Twitter and Facebook. whenever he feels like he's being attacked. He needs to just learn to let that stuff go in one ear and out the other. Do you relate well to those under your authority, as well as those whose authority you are under? So Naaman in the Bible says that Naaman was a man who was a captain over the Syrian army, but Naaman was also a man who was under a king, the king of Syria. So Naaman was a man who understood what it was like to be sandwiched, I'm just pulling him out because the Bible specifically mentions him as being sandwiched in between authority. He was in authority and he was under authority. So we have to learn how those relationships work and do well with those that we're under and those that we're over as well. Leader knows how to exercise it and submit to it as well. Do people feel comfortable with you when admitting a mistake or shortcoming, or are they afraid of your reaction? So if you've ever had men or women under you, Mac was in the military, just different ones were businessmen and women, some taught in colleges, schools, whatever profession or vein or career choice you've been in. A lot of us know what it's like to have people over us, people under us, have people come to us. And so when people come to you to admit a mistake or a shortcoming, are they afraid of your reaction? Because a true leader can be strong and still have sympathy and compassion. Are you interested in all types of people? That just basically has to do with prejudice, social classes, race, etc. Is there any prejudice in you? Here's the big one. Are you tactful? Are you tactful? Leaders learn how to anticipate how their words will impact other people, so they think before speaking. That's something that I give a lot of thought to. I am tactful. I pride myself in that, a good pride. I think about everything that I'm going to say, and I think about the impact that it might have on someone when I'm about to have a conversation, particularly a tough conversation with somebody. I always want to make sure that I have chose my words wisely to have the effect and the impact that I want it to have, not a negative one. I was transparent with you. How many of you guys will be transparent with me? How many of you struggle with tact sometimes? Let's see, about half of you, 50% of you just raised your hand. Okay, is your will strong and steady? I mean, I already knew anyway because I pastor you guys. I didn't want to see if you'd be honest. Is your will strong and steady? Leaders must not vacillate and drift back and forth. They know the difference between conviction and stubbornness. There is a difference in between being convicted and standing firm on your convictions and then just being stubborn about stuff. There's a difference. Can you forgive? Do you nurse resentment? I misspelled that. Do you nurse resentment and harbor ill feelings toward those who have hurt you? So can you forgive me for misspelling nurse? Are you reasonably optimistic? Because pessimism and leadership do not mix. Leaders are positively visionary. Being transparent, negative people, cynical people annoy me. I have trouble with that. I can only tolerate it for very long before I have to call them out on it, because I don't deal well with somebody who is supposed to be in leadership who has constantly negative attitude. So I usually end up having to say something about that at some point. Are you reasonably optimistic? Have you identified a master passion in your life, such as Paul, who said, "This one thing I do"? Have you identified a master passion in your life? I have, and I'm telling you, it's really made me happy when I identified that. Knowing your passion and having singleness of motive will focus your energy and power on a desired object, because leaders need strong focus. And then last of all, how do you respond to new responsibility? So you guys can keep, you guys, I don't know what all I'm missing back there, but you guys can keep evaluating yourself. R.E. Thompson wrote, "How we handle relationships tells us a lot about our potential for leadership." Here are 5 questions regarding relationships to ask yourself, okay? Number 1, do others' failures annoy me or challenge me? Do other people's failures annoy you or challenge you? These are rhetorical. You don't have to answer me out loud, okay? These are about self-evaluation. Number 2, do you use people or cultivate people? Do you use people or cultivate people? Do you direct people or develop people? Do you direct people or develop people? Do you criticize people or encourage people? Do you criticize people or encourage people? So you're answering internally right now. Some of you may be writing pluses or minuses down on one side or the other of these questions? Do you shun and avoid those with special needs or seek out those with problems? So that's a host of self-examinations for you to take a look at over the next month. But the thing is they mean very little unless we act to correct the deficits in our life and fill in the gaps of our training. And I don't just put stuff out. I'm not just into developing you. I go to great lengths and extents to keep developing myself as well. Part of a mentorship team right now. I read a couple of books a month. I go to events. I go to places. I have people over me that I submit to. Their leadership, their oversight, their guidance. I'm always trying to develop me, continue developing me as a leader, as a man, as a husband, and as a person. So development is key. So take some of the points of weakness or failure that you identified or that you might have already been aware of and partnership, enter into partnership with the Holy Spirit, because you have to go into intentional character training in the days ahead. If you're going to correct some of those deficits, fill in some of the gaps in training, you have to be intentional about it. So that also means prayer is important. I want to include prayer in that, but prayer alone is not going to solve the problem, because praying and asking the Lord for strength and courage is one thing, but then you have to start making better choices and better decisions. You have to start managing particular moments, where in moments that flare up where you failed before, then capitalize on that at that time. So adding leadership potential to our lives usually requires that we shake off any negative elements that are holding us back. So that's what the last part of the list is. I'll stop there. I'll send this home with you and let you read over this in your time, but shake off whatever is a negative element that might be holding us back, okay? Because where we're at right now at Grace Center, we have lots of positions that we need, lots of volunteers that we need, putting structure in place right now. We have lots of things we want to do with our children and our youth and with the homeless and just needs that we want to meet around the community and things like that, but it can't be the same 8 that do it all. So at some point, we have to really expand the volunteer base of Grace Center. We have to get volunteer teams in place, and that's, those are the moments where we're going to do like Pastor Stephen said, and we're going to start putting demands on, start putting weight on people to see what's in them, because I believe in what's in you. Amen. All right, any questions or comments? Anything you want to chip in here? It's 3 o'clock, so I want to shut up and get you on out of here. I'm not preaching in Weatherford tonight. There's just a service out there that a friend of mine is preaching that I'm going to go say hi to him at. And there's an apostolic center in Weatherford. It's been there for 20 years. And it's a friend of mine and Stacy's that we grew up with who built it and has raised it up. And he's been wanting to meet us and talk with us for a while. He's another guy who's interested in our building campaign and what we have going here as well. So that's why I'm going to Weatherford. Let's go say hi to them. Yes.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
What is the difference between when demands are put on you and you, how do I put this? If you just flat don't want to do something, do you understand what I'm trying to get at? Sometimes there might be something that I've done that, I've been there, I don't want to do that anymore.
Right.
And the growth, you know what I mean? Where's the balance in that?
Oh, it may not be your passion. If you feel that strongly about not participating in something or some vein of ministry or some area of ministry, it may not be your calling. Okay. And yes, that's pretty important as well as identifying. Yeah, as a matter of fact, before developing comes identifying. So I think identifying what areas are your strong suits. I wouldn't want to put a demand on somebody to serve in children's ministry that's not called to it.
Okay.
It'd be one of the most fruitless experiences of their life. It would frustrate them. They just want to slam a kid against the wall or something. If you're not called to do that, it's just not a good fit.
Yeah.
I don't mean that bad, but that's just if you're not gifted for that. And likewise, there's other areas that you're just not gifted in. Your skill set's not that area. So I don't think that's what he's talking about. I think what he's talking about is just overall ministry, so that you never really know what a person's capable of till you put something on them. But I do think that that's something you put on them, you know, needs to kind of be tied to their gift,
Okay.
in a manner of speaking. You know, he said your classroom may not look like your calling. Well, that's the case for me. I haven't been in a classroom for the last 6 years. My classroom was plumbing. I plumbed for 27 years before I pastored full time. So that was my classroom. And ironically, when the Lord talks with me, he talks to me a lot about water supply, about supplies. I understand the networking. I understand the piping systems. I understand the necessity of water coming in and waste going out.
Yeah.
I mean, there's terminology that can never be removed from me now because I grew up in that line of work, in that field of work. Not only that, but I worked hand in hand with the construction of houses. So I understand foundation and footing and stem wall and construction and all of that. That's all an integral part of my ministry now. But it didn't have anything to do with Bible college. It had to do with all those years out on construction sites. So, Dave?
Yeah, just a real quick statement. This thing about demand. I've met people who place a demand on themselves versus a demand that the Holy Spirit is placing on them. And it's never good when you place a demand on yourself.
On the last page, one of the points I didn't read was to perfectionists. You have to learn how to release yourself and set realistic goals, because there are people that are perfectionists and they place heavy demands on themselves. And the problem is they put such a demand on themselves that when they fail, they almost can't forgive themselves.
Yeah.
And I know people personally. I mean, I've dealt with this type in ministry through the years, who just, once they fail, it tailspins them for so long. It takes a long time for them to come out of that and to really recover back to where they used to be, because they've disappointed themselves so deeply because they buckled and made a mistake. So part of that is they need some help, you know, to learn how to not be so hard on themselves. But they also need to learn to set realistic goals instead of setting goals that are so insurmountable that you're almost setting yourself up for failure. I believe in goals and expectations, but that would be like me saying I'm going to lose 100 pounds this year. I mean, it can happen, sure. I know that it can, but that's an unrealistic goal.
Yeah.
What I would want to cut that in half to be realistic and then celebrate that victory, you know, so that's part of that. That's a good point, Dave. Mac?
One of the things through life I found is that by human nature we don't volunteer. In the military, we found that the volunteer was the guy who forgot to take 2 steps back when they asked for volunteers to step forward. Okay?
Yeah.
And it's just, whoa. The mark of a good leader is also to be able to tell what talents that those underneath him may have, that he can lift and rise up, some quickly, some not so quickly. Some people will, it'll be others who will recognize talents that they don't recognize themselves.
That's very true.
So I put a lot of that on leadership to be able to do that, to recognize those talents and develop those. And even to know the difference between those that have strong talents, those that have leader talents.
Yeah.
But everybody does have strong talents.
Sure. Different areas.
And then, but it's exactly, and putting people in the right place is incredibly important.
No, I agree.
But
I agree.
You got to know what talents you have. There has to be an inventory.
And it took me a while to learn, and that's a good point. It took me a while to learn that there is something worse than not having someone to fill a need, and that is putting that wrong person in that need. When you take the wrong person, you create a situation where you have to backpedal, feelings get hurt, and you end up having to take someone out of a position they never should have been in. That's leadership's fault.
Well, it's just like the church that had the young man, the young boy, who saved their bacon, so to speak.
Yeah.
Had they had already done their work in recognizing their talents,
Yeah.
maybe they wouldn't have failed the first time around.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe they would have already called on him.
Yeah, and I agree about the volunteers. It really takes people with an eye for it, people to spot who is. When I use the word volunteer a while ago, I'm talking about pay grade. You know what I'm saying? I'm not talking about we're going to stand up here and beg people to volunteer for stuff. We're not even going to do that. We'll approach people that we've identified with certain gift sets. But I was using it as like a pay grade description. Like there's a whole volunteer staff that Bishop Tony has up at their church. They just call them volunteers because they're not part of the paid staff. But they are the oil in the cog of that machine up there. I mean, they make it all happen, and they invest a lot into them. So that's kind of what I was referring to. But anybody else? I know we're a small church right now, and you know, it's really tempting to want to just take someone and put them over youth, take someone and put them over children, take someone and put them over this and that, and just make it happen. But I've just, you know, and I've made that mistake a few times and lost friendships over it, you know, and had things go south and it didn't work out. And so I want to go down that way again. I just want to be patient and pray and follow the Spirit's leading and wait until the right person is there. It's much less messy to handle it that way. And that is the consensus of other men like Terry Bates and Tony Miller, guys that have been down that road. They've made that same mistake. So, all right, well, guys, thanks for your time this afternoon. We love you. We appreciate you. And we're going to head to Weatherford and pray you have a great rest of the day. Some of y'all are going to do a token tonight. Okay, good. Yes. We'll give them a hug for me.
I'm gonna go sleep in my car till I get up on the stage. I'm so tired. Sherry's preaching all night. And I don't want to drive home and then drive down to Oh, nothing.
Like this one over here?
Well, I don't know. I won't see the doctor until the 1st of June. I think he'll do it before then.
Hey guys, I've got a lot of CDs burned. If you signed up for them, Steve, Jan, Janice, everybody love Nita.
Yeah, thanks. Work.
Yeah, there was, because if I get the book and I can't.
If you learn the name of that place, thanks.
I was here first. No.
Oh wait, here's some more Janice. Hold on.
Janice.
Hold on, here's some more Jan.
Oh.
See,
Is
Jude.
that this one or this morning?
There's one for this morning.
This morning?
Oh, okay. Did you sign up for it?
No.
Rita, Diana Pete.
Diana Pete.
Why didn't I see you before, Jan?
Are you gonna see Tina the next day or two?
Before
Probably.
I saw.
Okay, take that
Oh,
one.
wait.
Thank you.
She's there by
What?
herself.
It was you that was here, not Nita?
When?
Tonight.
Huh?
I'm here right now.
Nita's not here.
Up here?
Oh, okay. I saw you.
Yeah.